Hi, thanks for watching. So let's talk about decision making and where you might be feeling stuck. What I found after coaching thousands of people is that usually there are some mindset traps that we fall into that really keep us stuck, that really keep us feeling confused about what's ahead, that keep holding us back from our dreams. And so today I just wanted to reveal some of those unconscious mindset traps that may be holding you back from making a decision to really step forward and to really live a life and experience work that is fulfilling and that just excites you when you wake up in the morning, that energizes you and gets you out of bed. So, what I want to do is just go ahead and reveal three places where you may unconsciously be getting stuck and talk about how to undo that. So, the first thing that's important to know is that, when it comes to your happiness, it happens by design. It doesn't happen by accident. When you see people who just have it all together, it's not usually an accident. And what we know from research is that 50% of our happiness is actually determined by genetics. And so some of us are just born more chirpy, and some of us are just born with a more grumpy disposition and a set point. And that's just the way it is. 10% of our happiness is determined by circumstance. So, unfortunately, someone's cat has gotten sick, or the economy has just shifted. There are things that just happen that we have no control over, and that influences our happiness, but actually only about 10%, which is usually we think it's a lot more. But the reason why we usually think it's a lot more is because we don't always feel like we have choice over what happens, but we actually have a lot of choice over our thoughts and how we respond to our life and what is happening. And that's what actually influences 40% of our happiness. And that's the area we're going to play in, is what kind of choices can we make about the thoughts that we think, about how we choose to see our situation, and about the behaviors we engage in. So the key to remember whenever you're at the cusp of making any big decisions around how to improve your situation at work or at home or in your relationships, wherever, it's important to remember that no matter where you go, there you are. And if you are about to make a drastic decision, what's super critical is that you do some inner work first, some inner investigation on what is it that you really, really want versus, what is it that I can't stand and just want to get as far away as I can from. Those are two very different orientations and can land you in very different destinations. So if you're focusing on escaping the pain versus moving towards something that you really want, you may land in very different places. And so if you don't take the time to really figure out what it is that you really want or what matters to you, or what's really going on, then you may find yourself perpetually experiencing the same pattern over and over again. So if you find yourself being, pardon my language, saying, oh shit, how did I land here again? It's probably because you haven't looked at something within yourself. It actually doesn't have to do with the circumstances. It has to do with something that's going on from within. So the first subconscious kind of mind trap that I want to raise to your attention so that you can avoid it is loss aversion. So behavioral economists found that there's something that happens when it comes to us making decisions, and what influences us more is an aversion to loss. And so what does that mean? Well, loss aversion refers to people's tendencies to strongly prefer avoiding losses to acquiring gains. So let me say that again. We strongly prefer to avoid loss versus acquiring gains. So I would rather not lose so much more than potentially gain something that's better. And in fact, studies show that losses are twice as powerful psychologically as gains. So we work really hard to avoid loss. Almost, it takes up almost twice as much psychic energy to avoid loss than we spend and invest in potential gains. So, a perfect example of this is, have you ever stayed in a bad relationship a little bit too long, right? So you've stayed in that relationship, this isn't the right person for you, you're not experiencing the kind of relationship that you deserve or that you want, but you decide to stay in it anyway. Why? Well, probably because you kind of know what the situation is, you don't know what's out there, and so you just kind of stay with what you do know. And that explains something called the endowment effect. The endowment effect, again, behavioral economists kind of found this through some research, that what they found is that once we own something, once we own it, we actually give it more value than we gave it before we owned it. So there was the reason why there's a coffee mug image here is because there was a research study done where researchers asked students, hey, what would you prefer, a coffee mug or a chocolate? And the students all said, we'd prefer the chocolate. But they got the coffee mug. And then a little bit later on, the researchers said, hey, we'll trade you now. We'll give you the chocolate that you wanted in exchange for the coffee mug. But what happened was all the students wanted to keep the coffee mug. Once we own something, once it's ours, suddenly it seems more valuable. And so think about your situation right now. Is this what you would have asked for before you actually landed in it? Did you actually intentionally, consciously choose where you are? And if you wouldn't want what you are currently experiencing, then just consider, what is it that's holding you here? And usually it's the safety of what it is that you know. And that's just the way our brains are designed, is to avoid loss. Because if you're going to go out there and try something new, there's some uncertainty to it, right? And that uncertainty, in terms of how our brains work, usually is a high alert, sends a high alert signal for threats. So even though you may be going after something that could be your dream, that could be so much more fulfilling, our brains have a bias against it. So what I want you to just be aware of is, how intentional are you being in going after what you want versus just reacting out of fear of uncertainty? So just to kind of be aware of that. The second, I'm going kind of speedy because I want this to be kind of a quick training for you, not too long. So the second trap that we can fall into when it comes to making decisions is that we make them alone. We think that we got to figure this out on our own. And so, a perfect analogy to demonstrate why that is not the best way to make decisions and go about making change would be, let's imagine that we were boarding a plane and you look over to your left and you see the pilot who's sitting in the cockpit reading, how to fly a plane for dummies. I don't think you'd want to sit on that flight. If that were me, I would just go back to the gate. Because we don't want to put our life at risk with someone who, doesn't have all the right information or experience. But when you go at it alone, especially when you're making big career decisions and you're going at it alone, that's exactly what you're doing. You're choosing to sit on that flight. You're choosing to put your whole career life at risk without the right training and data points. And so what I highly recommend when it comes to making big decisions around your career, around, your life decisions, is to get some support from a resource that has perspective, that is not attached to you being a certain way. Often when we go to our friends and family, as much as they love us, sometimes they want what they think is best for us, not what is really best for us. And so you have to find a person, whether it be a professional like a coach or a mentor, who has the perspective and the experience to really give you some additional data points, because you don't know what you don't know. And they can really help you make decisions so much faster and more effectively. And in fact, there's research that shows that social support makes challenges seem less challenging. So there was an experiment where they took a group of students and they had them at the base of a hill, and they asked them to estimate the steepness of a hill, and then they estimated the steepness, whatever it was. And then they put a friend by their side. And what they found is that those with someone by their side determined the steepness of the hill to be less steep. And the more that these people knew each other, so the more that the two people knew each other at the base of the hill, the more trust there was, the less steep they estimated the hill. So when we have someone by our side, it literally influences how we see the world and the challenges up ahead. So I strongly encourage you to find a resource, a coach, a mentor to guide you through this, because otherwise it could just take way too long. And you could be making a decision without kind of the additional perspective that is really useful. Now, the final kind of thing that can influence your decision making in not such a great way is investing too little in helping you make that decision. And so what do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes when it comes to making a decision, especially around your career, or when it comes to career decisions, most people are savers versus investors when it comes to the career. When it comes to other domains, I see people being investors all the time. They invest in their health. They hire a trainer. They buy really nice workout clothes. They go on special diets. They go on special retreats. When it comes to having fun, you invest in that. When it comes to vacations, you invest in that. But something is different when it comes to careers. And maybe that's because there's an expectation that you're just going to get all the resources you need to advance. But what's super critical, especially when it comes to your career, is to be an investor in it. Now, of course, that requires some initial upfront investment, right? But let's talk about, or let me take a moment, or why don't you take a moment to ask yourself, what is it costing you to stay where you are? So I'll give you some examples of what I hear all the time. So the first thing that people say is like, well, if I'm not happy at work, well, it's just causing me a lot of stress. Okay, so it's causing you a lot of stress. And then what else? Well, that's really impacting my confidence. Okay. And then that's really impacting my performance at work and my motivation at work. And then what happens when I come home is I'm so stressed about all of that and how I'm not performing like I used to and thinking about my options. I'm not present with those I love. So even though we may be in the same room, I'm not really like listening, and I'm not really sharing all of myself. Okay. What else is happening? Well, because I'm kind of just depressed about all this, I'm working too much. I'm not making really good food choices. And so I'm not eating as well. I'm not exercising as well. In fact, I'm starting to experience pains that I never had before. Okay. So, what is this costing you? I mean, this is when you really get down to it, it's costing you a lot to spend your precious days trudging through hour by hour, waking up with dread or feeling overwhelmed, not performing at your kind of highest potential, not feeling fulfilled, and then coming home and not being able to be present with those you love, letting your health suffer. This is way too high a cost to continue. So when it comes to thinking about your career and what's next and making decisions, make sure that you're really investing in yourself, because what else is more valuable than where are you going to get more ROI than investing in yourself, than betting on yourself? So that's it for today. I hope that this kind of gives you some insight to start to just be a little bit more aware of what may be influencing your thinking when it comes to making decisions. One, are you choosing to avoid loss, or are you choosing to move towards what it is that you really want? Two, are you making these decisions in a vacuum without the appropriate support and perspective? And three, are you investing in giving yourself the tools and the skills to make the best choices you can for your career? So hope that was helpful, and look forward to talking to you soon. Okay,